Um, we're in a big, chaotic, overgrown Latin American capital city. It's about 10 years after a war, a civil war, and the host of the program that gives the book its title is a woman named Norma, and Norma is famous and beloved in the country for bringing people together. So people call the program up and they say things like, my cousin left the village 10 years ago and he lives in the city and no one's heard from him, does anyone know where he is? And Norma periodically makes these grand reunions. So the novel opens when a boy shows up at the radio station. He's about 11 years old, his name is Victor, he comes from the jungle, and he says to Norma, he has a list of all the people who've gone missing from his village, and on this list is one of her husband's aliases. So the novel attempts to tell the story of how this name winds up on this list. But in order to do that, we have to rewind about 25, 30 years, tell the story of the war, and more importantly, I think the story of the post-war period in this particular Latin American country. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think it is very much about the reality of Latin America. I'm wary of the word message, only because I think that many people will find a message in there, but there's no political ideology espoused, and there's no program offered. In some cases, I think it's useful just to simply do a diagnosis of a problem, and I think sometimes a novel can do that. It's been a really interesting experience because I've done 2 launches of the book, one in English, one in Spanish, also in Portuguese in Brazil, and next year in French in France and in Italy. But at least in English and in Spanish, the response has been very good. And, you know, of course, it's very exciting. In the end, it has very little to do with the process of writing. But, you know, as a young writer, I'm kind of learning a lot about the complementary aspects of, it's not just you in a room writing alone. If you want your book to be read, there's a bunch of other things you have to do as well. Or you can do, or you can not do, but if you don't do them, you know, you make your life a little more difficult. But in the end, I mean, you know, I think I'm trying to make this kind of a parenthetical year so that next year I can return to the real work, which is writing. Well, yeah, I just did a version of this interview in Spanish, and now here I am doing it in English, and I think that kind of captures a little bit of who I am. I was born in Lima, Peru. I was raised in the United States from a very young age, from age 3. I grew up in the South, in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. And I've always lived in a kind of bilingual, bicultural world. You know, my family was very Peruano, and my friends were all gringos, and you know, I've lived all over the United States. I've gone back into Peru. I've traveled a bunch this year, and in general, you know, I live now in a community in Oakland, California that's very much a Latin American community. You know, it's a Mexican neighborhood, Chicano neighborhood, and it feels really nice actually to live in the United States and still have a, you know, a part of my reality in Latin America, and constantly be coming and going. I think I'm part of that generation that switches languages, cultures, references without even thinking about it. But on the other hand, sometimes it doesn't feel like an advantage because that implies more work. You know, if they translate it to Greek, I have nothing to do. I have nothing to offer, and so I don't work on it. It's just done. But when it's translated to Spanish, obviously because I'm Latino, because I was born in Peru, and because my family speaks Spanish, I have a much greater investment emotionally in the book being excellent. You know, so that if someone doesn't like the book, the novel, it's not because of the translation, it's because they don't like the book. You know what I mean? And that's very important to me, for the book in Spanish to stand on its own, quite apart from the issues of translation. And I think it's successful. I mean, in the sense that the book in the Spanish version is as close as possible to the English. I don't know many writers who do. I think we think of ourselves, we think of our characters, we think about what strikes us as beautiful or interesting or important or funny, or, you know, I don't know anybody, and I know a lot of writers, I don't know anybody who thinks about their audience, because there's nothing helpful in thinking about your audience, because in the end you don't really know and you have no control over that anyway. I'm done traveling in a few months, and I'm working on a lot of different projects. A radio documentary for the BBC. I'm working on a book of short fiction with a short novel included. I'm working on a longer novel. These are all, in some ways, projects that have been sort of on hold while I've been doing a lot of other kinds of stuff this year, specifically promotion. But obviously, my first love is fiction, and that's what I intend to keep doing, you know, for the long haul, as long as I can make a living doing it. And then even when I can't, I'll keep doing it. Then what else can I do? I have no other real useful skills.